Hey, this is AJ with Blackhawk Bushcraft. Thank you for joining the channel today. I wanted to briefly talk about Scandinavian ground knives and why I absolutely love Scandinavian ground knives, okay? For those of you that know me know that I am a small knife guy. I love a nice small knife with a sweeping edge that really isn't much longer than the width of the palm of your hand, okay? And I love Scandinavian ground knives because for me and my preferences, they just work well based on what I use a knife for, primarily in this size, which is working wood, okay? I had somebody post a comment in one of my earlier videos about how terrible Scandinavian ground edges are and why they still can't find anybody out there to convince them that this edge here is better than a flat grind. Well, my friends, I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. I'm just here to tell you what works well for me. And the reason why I like Scandinavian ground knives, outside of their ability to work wood well based on what I like to do, is it's completely preference driven, okay? And when I'm talking Scandinavian ground knives, this is the type of edge profile that I'm talking about. You've got your blade stock, and then right at the edge is where you have your grind beveled equal degrees on each side to what's called a zero grind, which means there is no secondary bevel here, okay? So, as you can see, any small knife I have is pretty much going to be Scandinavian ground. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not a place and purpose and a reason to have some type of a small knife like this in a full flat grind or a saber grind. Okay, and I will say that there are some advantageous reasons for why you might want to carry what I consider to be a more versatile flat grind. Okay, for those of you that use Scandinavian grind knives, you will know that while they excel in many regards in wood processing and wood crafting applications, they absolutely suck at food prep. If you ever try to slice a potato or a carrot or anything like that, you end up mostly splitting through it, because that is what one of the benefits of the edge is. You're not going to have a nice, fine, slicey edge like a full flat grind. So if food prep is your thing and you're like, well, I want a knife that primarily excels at food prep, then I probably wouldn't recommend that your primary grind be a Scandinavian zero ground edge. Okay? Not saying that you can't use an edge like this for food prep, but it's not going to excel in the same way that a flat grind would. Okay? So, again, I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. I'm here to tell you what I like in a small knife and why I prefer this grind over other grinds, because I'm primarily going to carry a small knife for working wood. Whether I'm making reductions or carving other notches or pot hooks or whatever it may be, this is the knife that I find works best for me. And I don't need anybody to try to convince me otherwise. It's not that you can't use a flat grind or a saber grind to do wood processing. You absolutely can. And if that's what works for you, then by all means, nobody's twisting your arm to tell you to go with something else. Just because other people like this grind doesn't mean that you have to. And just because people hate this grind doesn't mean that everybody else has to hate it. My heck, tons of people love this type of a grind. In fact, civilizations have been using this type of a Scandinavian grind for hundreds upon hundreds of years. So obviously, there's some reason why this blade grind works well, okay? And it doesn't mean that it's going to work well for everybody. The one thing that I will say is another, something that I disagree with is typically you'll hear people say, well, if you want a knife that's easy to sharpen, then just go with a Scandinavian ground knife, because you can basically match the bevel on your stone, get the degree based on the bevel, and then just sharpen it and you're good to go. And while that might be true, what I will say is if you are wanting to retain the zero grind, you absolutely must remove the same amount of material from the entire bevel. And if any of you have experience with zero grind knives, you can find that that can be a real pain in the butt to maintain the zero edge, which is why a lot of the times, depending on how shallow the grind is, a lot of people will just put a secondary bevel on that knife. And in many cases, that actually makes the edge of a zero grind knife much stronger. Like take this Mora, for example. When I first got this Mora brand new years ago, this thing would bend and roll because it's a zero grind. And when I'm talking zero grind, this is what I'm referring to. So for those of you that may not be fully aware. Okay, so if I've got the edge of my knife and I'm looking at it, you know, something down like this, okay, this is what a zero grind knife would look like. Okay, so you've got your bevel on each side of your Scandi grind, and it goes to a point with no secondary bevel. It is a 0 degree edge right there, which makes it super slicey, and it allows it to dig in and to work wood and to carve well, just as if you were using wood carving tools like a chisel. Okay, you have a zero grind. Now this one isn't zero grind anymore because I found that this one with a micro bevel, this one is probably even more convex by at this point because of the age and the use of this knife and the sharpening. But some knives, depending on how shallow they're ground, if they're a zero ground Scandinavian knife, you may have to do that. In fact, one in particular that comes to mind, which I've heard from many of the users, is the Rod Garcia Skookum Bushtool. In fact, Rod himself recommends putting the micro bevel on his tool to reinforce and strengthen the edge because it is more of a shallow grind. This Mora right here, I'd wager to say is probably, you know, 9 to 10 degrees on each side, so between an 18 degree to 20 degree bevel. Like most LT Wright knives are like 18 to 20 degrees as well, so 9 to 10 degrees on each side. Now these knives right here by a very awesome friend, for those of you that are not familiar with these knives, RJ Evans or Rob Evans Woodsman. I'll leave his information in the description and in and a link to a site. But I was talking to him about it, and I noticed, like when compared to my LT knives, and especially my Moras, Rob uses a much more robust angle. It's not as shallow. And I reached out to him to confirm that, and I'm like, hey, it looks like you're probably using somewhere between 12 to 14 degrees would be my guess. And he's like, yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm actually using 13 degrees, and that actually gives you a really strong edge, which I found really interesting because I was also talking to him about this knife. This is the NKD Corpy 85, and this knife itself has the tendency to like to bend and roll. In fact, this one I try to maintain at a zero degree Scandi. And if you can see here, and I don't know if this will pick it up very well, but you have the edge and it comes in, but then it kind of, you know, rounds out and then dips in a little bit there because I got a really interesting bend in the zero grind there. Oh, and in fact, I can actually see the light gleaning off of a little bend. I don't even know if the camera will pick this up, but I've got a little spot right there that still looks like it might be bending. But anyways, as you can see though, I mean, it's still plenty slicey. It slices and dices and makes julienne fries. But like Rob's knives too, his edges are absolutely slicey and just a lot more robust. But anyways, I was talking to him about this, and he's like, yeah, if you want to avoid the roll, you just need to put a micro bevel on it, which is true. But what I found really interesting is when I was looking at these, I was like, my heck, they almost look like they're at least putting a 13-degree bevel on the NKDs. And I actually looked up the information last night and found out that this is actually 30 degrees, 15 degrees on each side, which really surprised me because of how rolly this edge is. So I'll probably end up putting a micro bevel on it. But that's what I can say is one of the downsides of a Scandi ground knife is if you're wanting to maintain the 0 degree, you're either going to, depending on the type of still, get microchips and end up putting a secondary bevel or convexing it slightly to take care of that, to strengthen the edge, or you're going to get what I find with Mora knives is, and also that I found with the NKD, is that you have a tendency to want to bend and roll, and then you're going to need to sharpen that. And if you want to maintain the 0 degree Scandi edge, you're going to just have to put up with that or add a micro bevel to reinforce and strengthen the edge. But that's one thing I can say about Rob's knives is I have not found a reason. This one I actually haven't used significantly. This one right here, this MK2, I've put through the paces. This FTP I've put through the paces as well. But his edges, like this is the MK1, he just has a really robust edge, and I think that his heat treat is also a reason why you don't get that issue. I don't find any chipping with his blades, and I don't find any rolling, and the more robust edge makes sense, and actually it makes for a really great knife there. But anyways, so like with this Mr. Flat Grind that wanted to make a comment, so like a flat grind, you're going to have the spine of your knife, and then you're going to go out like this, and then you have at the very tip, which is what some people refer to as a V-edge. It's just your secondary bevel right here, but you got the spine of your knife, and then the full flat grind is going to just take you all the way down to a point. And the reason for the secondary edge is because that strengthens the edge. But you can see there, based on, you know, your Scandi grind, of course this one's going to be more slicey and is going to be better as an all-around general purpose, specifically if food prep is one of your main goals in mind, versus a Scandi edge. But when it comes to working wood, it doesn't mean that you can't use a flat grind, or if it was a high saber grind. It's just, in my opinion, again, my preference, the Scandinavian ground edge is intended and designed to work wood better. You have a very strong, robust wood, which is good for wood prep, firecraft, wood crafting, carving, okay? And it doesn't mean that you can't do it with some other type of a grind. It's just, it's designed to excel better in those applications. So by all means, just because I'm a smaller knife guy, and I know I'm going to get some other person probably commenting saying, well, I don't know why you just don't go with a one-tool option and get yourself one of those big old nice American-made Essie Hunglas 10 inches of full 1095 glory. I can slice, I can dice, I can chop down trees, I can baton, I can make feather sticks, I can make triggers, blah, 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 blah. And while that may be true, if that's your preference, then by all means go for it. I don't like carrying big, giant boat anchors on my hip. That's just me. I like a small knife that is comfortable to wear as a neck knife and that works wood well. And if I'm going to carry this and I have a big knife, then I'm going to still carry this as a companion knife to the big knife, because I want something that can excel more in intricate carving than what a big knife would. And it doesn't mean that you can't do that with a big knife. Again, it's completely preference driven. So anyways, that's my rant. This video has gone on long enough. I'm now going on 14 and a half minutes, but AJ right here, NKD Corp 85, which was a go-to staple for me for a long time, and then I came upon this knife, and if you can see there, they're pretty dang similar in design, except this knife is so much better. It feels my hand better. This handle's pretty round. Doesn't feel my hand as well as the FTP, and I don't have the still issues with any of these knives like I do with these. Okay, So, is there a place for Scandi knives? Absolutely, in my opinion, there is. It's my preferred grind of choice in a small companion knife. If it's not your cup of tea, then don't drink it. Go drink your full flat grind cup of tea or your saber grind. Okay, I just want to share what works for me and the reasons why. It doesn't mean that it's the best grind for all applications, but generally speaking, for everything that I do with a small knife, and because I prefer a small knife to a large boat anchor on my hip, this is what I gravitate to. So this is AJ with Blackhawk Bushcraft. Thank you so much for joining this little video. Please like and subscribe. Please feel free to share any comments that you have as well. Thank you so much and have a great day.